One of the first things I'd like to deal with in this video is the claim made by Deb Magiel that there are no moderate Muslims. Here are a few examples of moderate Muslims. Rabia Chowdhury is a National Security Fellow at the New America Foundation. Mo Ansar, a social and political commentator, works to ease cultural tensions between Muslims and non-Muslims. Qasim Rashid, a human rights activist and author of The Wrong Kind of Muslim and Extremist, books speaking out against Islamic extremism. Qasim Jamil, a humanitarian aid worker leading aid convoys to Syria to help orphans. And of course the Quilliam Foundation, which is an anti-extremist think tank founded by Majid Nawaz, a former Islamic extremist, now reformed. Moderate Muslim does not equal Muslim I agree with about everything. I don't agree with anyone about everything. Most obviously, I don't agree with any of the aforementioned people when it comes to the question of whether or not God exists. To give a more specific example of disagreement, Mo Ansar has defended halal slaughter in the past. As much as I respect Mo as a supporter of animal rights, I simply cannot agree that halal slaughter is acceptable, and I do think it should be illegal. Moderate Muslim also does not equal nice Muslim, not necessarily anyway. Moderate can perhaps be considered an umbrella term for those who practice their faith in a non-imposing manner. They may still hold unpleasant views, just as fundamentalists do, but they don't attempt to violently or aggressively impose those views on other people. Obviously, like a lot of categories, it is frustratingly blurry, but hopefully most sensible people can figure out that not all Muslims are fundamentalists. It's worth looking up Islamic modernism and Islamic secularism to gain a more comprehensive idea of what moderate Muslims might believe. Deb Magiel has asserted outright that there are no moderate Muslims. From what I can gather from her posts, she believes there are Islamic fundamentalists and there are atheists who pretend to be Muslims out of fear of punishment for apostasy, and that's it. This is actually a more extreme position than Richard Dawkins has, as he has asserted that he believes Malala Yousafzai is only a Muslim because she lacks education, and that once she has received more education, she will likely become an atheist. This might happen, but it's very presumptuous, not to mention more than a bit rude, for Dawkins to make such a statement. A person's religious beliefs are personal and therefore not something another person can claim to understand on such a personal level, no matter how much they read the Quran. Deb's view, however, is not merely that Malala will one day become an atheist, but that she already is one, meaning she's being even more presumptuous than Dawkins. I don't doubt there are people who live as Muslims, but who are secretly atheists. But given the fact that such people are keeping their atheism secret, such a claim is an unfalsifiable hypothesis. It's also an accusation of apostasy, which I don't think some people understand the seriousness of. I strongly suspect an individual such as Malala Yousafzai would be highly offended if someone were to accuse her of apostasy. So, what Islamophobia is? Simply put, an irrational fear of Islam. The Runnymede Trust outlines 8 characteristics of Islamophobia. 1. Islam seen as a single monolithic block, static and unresponsive to new realities. 2. Islam seen as separate and other, A. Not having any aims or values in common with other cultures, B. Not affected by them, C. Not influencing them. 3. Islam seen as inferior to the West, barbaric, irrational, primitive, sexist. 4. Islam seen as violent, aggressive, threatening, supportive of terrorism, engaged in a clash of civilizations. 5. Islam seen as a political ideology used for political or military advantage. 6. Criticisms made by Islam of the West rejected out of hand. 7. Hostility towards Islam used to justify discriminatory practices towards Muslims and exclusion of Muslims from mainstream society. 8. Anti-Muslim hostility accepted as natural and normal. Note, a person need not display all these characteristics to be considered Islamophobic. Deb Magiel has continually attacked a straw man of Islamophobia, saying it refers to a non-existent mental illness due to the suffix phobia. The fact that said suffix is often used outside of a mental health context in words such as xenophobia, homophobia and transphobia is something she is conveniently ignoring. Deb has claimed she doesn't have any special hatred for Islam and that she hates all religions equally. However, she has attempted to back up her argument that Islamophobia does not exist with a link to gatesofvienna.net, a Christian fundamentalist website. Said website is also staunchly pro-capitalist, which conflicts with Deb's professed anti-capitalist views. Sam Harris attacks a straw man of Islamophobia, saying it refers to any and all criticism of Islam. Given as he condones both torture of prisoners at Guantanamo Bay and racial profiling at airports, and he supports Israel, I've no doubt that Sam Harris is an Islamophobe. I also believe Bill Maher to be an Islamophobe for similar reasons. It is of course possible for Islamophobia to be called incorrectly. Legitimate and rational criticism of Islam can be mistaken for paranoid and irrational criticism of Islam. But this is not a reason to deny the existence of the prejudice altogether. Rather, it is a reason to perhaps define what is meant by Islamophobia a bit more clearly, and perhaps for those making legitimate criticisms of Islam, to place a bit more emphasis on the differences between their arguments and those of Islamophobes. It's worthy of note that the reason there is hypersensitivity around criticisms of Islam is because so many criticisms of Islam are Islamophobic in nature. If legitimate, rational critics are frustrated that their arguments are often mistaken for Islamophobia, they should blame the Islamophobes for sullying the debate. I made a video on this topic called Why I Exercise Caution When Criticising Islam. I have also made 3 videos in which I criticise Islam and have never been accused of Islamophobia as a result. So I can't agree that the term is used to shut down any and all criticism of Islam. There'll be some links to those in the description. I may as well address Ben Affleck's comments here, seeing as I've mentioned Sam Harris and Bill Maher, with whom he recently locked horns. Personally, I think he argued quite well if we consider the fact that he hadn't arrived prepared for such an argument. He was there to promote a movie. I will agree with some critics that his use of the word racist was somewhat clumsy, largely because it opens up the whole Islam is not a race can of worms. The reason racist is the go-to word for many ordinary people is because while Islam is indeed not a race, a lot of Islamophobes are racist, as evidenced by vile slurs such as sand nigger. That said, his argument can't just be rejected in its entirety based off of one technicality. Ask most ordinary people who ISIS are, and they will probably answer something along the lines of they're an Islamic terrorist group. The same is likely to happen if you ask them who Al-Qaeda are. Ask them who the IRA are, however, and they're more likely to say they're an Irish terrorist group than they're a Catholic terrorist group. Ask them who the KKK are, and they'll likely answer they're a racist group, not they're a Protestant group. It's notable that we have a habit of framing Middle Eastern terrorist groups religiously, but framing groups closer to home politically and nationally. The Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain tend to be cynical of the term Islamophobia, but they acknowledge the problem exists. even if they take issue with the word. A good quote from their forum, quote, "Anti-Muslim bigotry is real and we recognise it. A member of the EDL made a great play of courting us, erroneously thinking that a forum of ex-Muslims may be their ally. But we recognise the EDL's belief in the direct causative collective guilt of all Muslims. We reject that. Islamophobia is a term that has become very elastic. It would be used to accuse practically everyone who posts dissent about Islam here, because it's a useful way of stigmatising any criticism, dissent or apostasy. So a discussion has to be had about that. Misusing the word in this way, as many Islamists and non-Islamists do regularly, is muddying the waters in quite a creepy, coercive and menacing way." End quote. So we can see that the CEMB tend to acknowledge the problem, but prefer the term anti-Muslim bigotry to Islamophobia. I've quoted the following article from their website in at least 2 of my previous videos, but I shall quote it here again. Quote, "CEMB opposes Islamism and the far right, 2 sides of one coin. Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain unequivocally opposes the far right, including groups like the British National Party, English Defence League and Stop Islamisation of Europe. We fully support the findings of a One Law for All report called Enemies Not Allies, the Far Right, which gives evidence on why opponents of Sharia, apostasy laws and Islamism must also oppose the far right. With Islamism being a far-right movement, they are 2 sides of the same coin. The far-right and Islamists have similar ideologies, characteristics and aims. Both rely on religion, both use a language of hate and are extremely xenophobic, misogynist, homophobic and anti-Semitic. Both rely on indiscriminate violence and terrorism to intimidate the population at large. They are dogmatic and punish free thinkers and dissenters. They use threats and scaremongering to push forward their agenda. Both are vehemently anti-working class and the left. They believe in the superiority of their views and culture and deal harshly with anyone who transgresses. The world they have in mind is equally bleak, segregated, hateful and inhuman." End quote. I'm a bit surprised more people don't go to the CEMB for their opinions or try and involve them in these discussions more, because the opinions of people who have experienced both what it's like to be a Muslim and an atheist are surely of value, not just the opinions of Muslims and culturally Christian atheists, such as myself, which are all we ever seem to hear on this topic. But we must stop ISIS. If you're someone whose response to the violence of ISIS is to act hostile to as many Western Muslims as you possibly can and spread rampant paranoia about them throughout your community, I'm intrigued. Please explain to me how this is going to stop ISIS. Do you think upon learning that someone sprayed go-home towel heads or similar nonsense on a motorway overpass, ISIS are going to call off all terrorist activities? Do you think if you draw enough pictures of the Prophet Muhammad, ISIS will hand over their weapons and surrender? ISIS, for the most part, don't care about Western Muslims. Worse, they consider many of them to be infidels. Hurting ordinary peaceful Muslims in the West does nothing to stop ISIS. It is also repulsive to use the deaths of people like Alan Henning as a justification for anti-Muslim bigotry. Owen Jones notes in The Guardian, quote, "Social media abounds with calls to share pictures of the murdered Salford taxi driver Alan Henning hugging a Syrian child, to showcase his kindness rather than his last moments, as ISIS would want." End quote. Indeed, Alan Henning went to help the children in Syria with his best friend Qasim Jamil, a British Muslim and humanitarian. The children he was helping were young Muslims themselves. Obviously, nothing about Alan Henning's tragic death can be used to justify anti-Muslim bigotry, and shame on those who have attempted to do so. To quote Qasim, quote, "Alan took a risk for the children of Syria. Alan was my best friend. Alan was a brother to me. He was a father figure. Being a non-Muslim so dedicated, he literally put his life on the line for these people." End quote. A few tips for people who wish to argue with me about this. Endlessly posting Hitchens quotes does not an argument make. Considering Christopher Hitchens was most famous for being an atheist, it's difficult not to notice the irony of how many people choose to deify him. If you think Hitchens made some good points about Islam and Islamophobia, that's fine, but you need to explain them. They don't stand up on their own merit. Endlessly posting passages of the Quran in order to show me how much violence and other such unpleasantness is contained within. I don't need you to do this, I already know. It should be pretty obvious to anybody who takes even a cursory glance at the world around them that not all Muslims interpret the Quran in the same way, just as not all Christians interpret the Bible the same way. Try reading up on Hadith, Quranism, Islamic modernism, and Islamic secularism. Additionally, I get more than a few comments from people who openly admit to not having watched my videos in their entirety, but still see it as their privilege to comment on said videos, usually in a negative manner. The purpose of the comment section under a video is to discuss said video. If you haven't watched it, then you certainly don't have anything useful to contribute to a discussion about it. Further, if you can't be bothered watching my video in its entirety, I fail to see why I should entertain your views in the comment section. As such, I am going to stop blocking these sorts of people. Thanks for watching.